Hello, everybody. We are back and we have entered the top 30 on this episode of the top 80 albums of the 80s. Of course, I am joined today by my good friend once again, Mr. John Stanek, Johnny Radio himself. Very excited to get in this episode. We're really getting to some of the best stuff on the list, I think, even in this episode. Whether I think they should be higher or not, this is where they landed, and we're going to get into it.
Yeah, it's a democracy, so there's always going to be some stuff that we have
Yeah.
some quibbles about, I think, and we may have one or two of those on this one, but yeah, we're getting to the cream of the crop, as they say. So let's get to it.
All right, guys, and that will take us right to number 30.
Full Moon Fever by Tom Petty. Just Tom Petty, not the Heartbreakers necessarily, although some of them did play on here. Mike Campbell, of course, the guitarist that has been by his side from day one. And I think he's amazing throughout this album, especially on Running Down a Dream.
Oh,
So incredible. Of course, you got all the hits. I Won't Back Down, Free Fallen. I mean, it almost feels like a greatest hits on side A, especially. The production is stellar by Jeff Lynne. There's not a bad song on this album. You're So Bad is great. Face in the Crowd. It's Petty, I think, at his this was his best album of the 80s, and I think in his career at that point, I think he did continue to get better in the early 90s as well. But this is a great pick, guys. So happy to see it on the list.
man, this is the one album that I am kicking myself for not getting to because
Yeah,
honestly, this should be in the top 20. This album is fantastic. And let me
I
be
agree.
honest, I wasn't a huge Petty fan before this. Like even Damn the Torpedoes I really liked, but I wasn't like losing my mind over it. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of his stuff gets maybe it's his voice or whatever is too raspy or too grainy. And I feel like he followed that blues rock heartland rock template almost to a T where the songs became musically very uninteresting. And then by a fate chance or a fate encounter he got with Jeff Lynne and they started writing these songs together. And that was really where magic happened. I mean,
Mhm.
this album, like you said, not a weak song on this album. Even the songs that I don't love, I'm still like, yeah, these are all good. Like, I really enjoy every song on here. But the best songs on here are Petty's absolute best songs, like Free Fallen, man. Come on. This is that chorus. And I'm
Yeah.
free free falling. I mean, how can you not want to sing along to that?
So
It's so
classic, and
anthemic.
just just
Uh,
on the D chord and D
dun,
to A.
dun,
It's just two
dun,
chords the
dun,
whole
dun.
song, but
It's
brilliant.
it,
Yeah.
it's so simple, but there's so much emotive energy to it, and just all the little stories he's telling, set in this
Yeah.
set in this picture of like San Fernando Valley, and
Yeah. All the
go to
vampires walking down the
walking down the
valley.
valley of
Yeah.
Westdale, Ventura Boulevard.
Boulevard. Yeah. So
And it's
good.
just the way he says, I'm a bad
Good
boy,
boy. Yeah.
don't
Love it.
even, it's very, very sardonic. And then, of course, I won't back down, man,
So
but
good.
I won't back down. No, and I love that line. You
Yeah.
can stand me
Stand
up
me up at the
against the
gates
gates
of
of hell,
hell.
but I
Yeah.
won't back down. And then the hey baby. I mean,
Yeah.
just the hooks on this album are incredible, especially those two songs, which I think
Yeah.
are my favorite. But then again,
Me
man,
too.
Running Down a Dream has one of the meanest guitar riffs I ever heard
Yeah.
in my from the
So
brilliant Mike
driving,
Campbell.
man. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh my
so
God.
good. And running down a dream.
Dream.
It's just
Yeah.
that Bo Diddley sort of or
Hmm.
that more like the Buddy Holly sort of riff, but
Right.
man, of course.
Yeah.
And I even love what Tom Petty even referred to as a shameless cover of a Birds song feel a whole lot better because
Hmm.
obviously you listen to Tom Petty, it's evident how much he was influenced by the Birds. And I
Right.
just feel like his voice, even though it's like the same exact song, his voice suits it so well, and Jeff Lynne's production is so crisp, so clean. Of course, You're So Bad is such a great song and has probably some of the darkest lyrics on the entire album, which for
Yeah.
Petty at the time, I was like, wow, this is really, really something. And of course, I love even something like the Apartment song is just such a great riff and such a great hook. And then of course, I love A Mind with a Heart of Its Own when he's like saying is I
Hmm.
slept inside your tree house. My middle name is Earl. It's like, well, his middle name was Earl, but it's just like such
Yeah,
a
man.
realist sort of song in the vein of Bob Dylan. Yeah, I absolutely love this album. Really, I wish I had it on my list because it would have been a lot higher than it is, and especially should not be below a couple of choices in this episode, which I am sure we will get into.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It should be higher, man. But great pick, guys, as always.
All right, and that is going to take us to number 29.
Well, I guess it would be nice if I could touch your body.
Faith by George Michael, his debut studio album from 1987. Yes, this is when George Michael really arrived on the scene, and he even won a Grammy for Album of the Year, if that means anything to you. But man, this is what a lot of people were looking for, because obviously he split off with Andrew Ridgeley and Wham, and he pursued a solo career, which I felt was much more fruitious. I guess not even just commercially and artistically speaking, but also just the songwriting here. There's so much more depth and just profoundness to these lyrics that he's talking about on this album, whether it be themes of devotion or drug abuse or domestic abuse. I mean, he gets into some really deep stuff on this album, and I think people often don't give George Michael enough credit to really how great of a lyricist he was. And obviously the hooks are off the chain on this. And obviously the title track, which is my personal favorite, one of the most iconic music videos from the 80s when George Michael's playing the guitar and shaking his ass. But just I just love also too, if you didn't notice that opening organ riff, which is so iconic, which lifted the melody of Freedom off of Make It
Mm.
Big. So that's why it might sound so familiar to some of you. But of course, when he gets into that Bo Diddley beat and says, well, I guess it would be nice if I could touch your body. It's such a great song right from the get, and maybe the best of his career. Maybe not. We could argue Freedom 94. But I mean, and then songs like Father Figure are just so beautiful and have like gospel tinge elements on that chorus.
Yeah.
I don't be your father figure, put your tiny hands on mine.
That's my
Uh,
favorite on the album, actually.
that's
Yeah.
not a bad choice, man. And also, it's one thing I want to note about that song, like lines like but love can be mistaken for a crime. You got to wonder if George Michael was trying to like come out and leaving like subtle hints. I just think stuff
Hmm.
like that's really interesting. But of course, I Want Your Sex parts 1 and 2. I like part 1 better, but man, it is so hooky. It's so catchy. It's so clever. I absolutely love that song. Even though it sounds pretty dated. It's basically him making a Prince song, but a great Prince song, you could say. And then stuff like Hand to Mouth is some, like I was saying with the subject matter, kind of like depicting the decrepitness of the world. It really is such a powerful track. And then of course, man, Kissing a Fool is absolutely amazing. And I think the track besides the title one that holds up the most with that lounge jazz feel and him just absolutely pouring his heart and soul into this love ballad with vocals that are just so controlled, so smooth, so euphoric to the point he almost can be compared to Freddie Mercury. I mean, he is one of the greatest vocalists of all time, and I feel does not get his just due. But I really think that is one of his absolute best ballads and a great way to close this already fantastic record. And this might come as a shock. I do like Make It Big a little bit more because objectively this is better, but it goes on for way too long. I think, especially there's not a bad song on here, but I do think it sounds a little bit dated, and I think it doesn't need to be 49 or 50 minutes. You know what I mean? But and
Sure.
I think Make It Big is more concise. But if you tell me that this is better, I can't disagree with you, and I think it literally is at the perfect spot on the list. I believe I had it at number 29. So
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have it on my list, but I get why it's on the list. And so obviously I wouldn't have it this high personally, but I can't dispute a lot of the things you said. I mean, his vocals are amazing, and throughout the album. And I could see why you might have the Wham album a little higher, just based on the catchiness of like more of the songs and the song,
Structure.
yeah, overall. But yeah, I can't fault the pick here. I'm not going to complain.
All
So
right. And yeah, no, really great choice, guys. Couldn't been in a better spot. And that will take us to an album that well, we'll get into it. Number 28.
Let's Dance by David Bowie from 1983. This is actually one of my favorite Bowie albums. And I know a lot of people will give me a lot of heat for that because, the 70s classic period, whatever. But he set out to make a pop dance record that has elements of blues, and it was produced by Nile Rodgers from Chic. And, you got the title track, which is so catchy, so hooky. And I don't know if it would necessarily want to make you dance, but it has some amazing lead blues guitar by none other than Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I think he shows up at other points in the album as well. But Modern Love, the opening track with those huge drums, the saxophone, another great catchy track. China Girl, I'm not as crazy about personally, but that was a big hit at the time. You got Ricochet on side B. I actually don't think there's many weak tracks on here. Even Cat People, which was used to great effect in the film Inglourious Bastards. I think overall it's a really strong album, and I know that my friend over here may not agree with that, but I think it's at a pretty good spot actually.
Okay. Let me just run this down. What this album is above. This is above Faith, Full Moon Fever, 3 Feet High and Rising, all of the John Williams scores, every single Madonna album, Belladonna, Legend, and Uprising. Yeah. What the actual fuck? Pretty Hate Machine, Make It Big, Sports, and even Metallica. I don't understand why this shit is above Metallica. Listen, I don't dislike this album. I think it's perfectly fine. Modern Love is a classic Bowie song, and of course you gotta love that song. Take me to the church on time, Modern Love. That I think is the best song on the album. The title track, very catchy, very memorable, goes on for way too long. And other than that, this album is okay. None of the tracks are particularly offensive. But this is like Bowie's most generic piece of work in his entire career. And you're telling me that this is somehow better than all of these? I don't get it.
Well,
I wouldn't have been mad if
generic. I think he set out to do that, and I think he accomplished his goal. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he was just bored of creating all these alter egos, and decided he wanted to join the party of the 80s. I don't quite know, but for all these, there's so many different bands and artists that came out of the 70s and into the 80s poorly. And I feel like Bowie, and I know you disagree here, but I think he actually was, and still to this day is looked back on more favorably here. I mean, you still hear Let's Dance all the time, and I think it still holds up.
Sure, I just don't think, and I know a lot of other people will back me up on this because I've seen people talk about. I don't think it is a artistic watermark for him at all. I really like it. I get like, yeah, he appealed to the pop sensibilities, but I don't see this as like necessarily an important piece of work. I really don't, especially like some other pop albums on this list that really kind of brought these artists to another, like Faith, for example, that really put George Michael on another level that he wasn't on previously, you could argue. And I just feel like Bowie would even I like this a little bit more than Scary Monsters, but even with that album, he was doing something different. And I do respect that. Here it was just like it literally is the most, I know
Well,
you.
if we're comparing to Scary Monsters, like that one, I find hard to access. Like
Yeah,
it's
no,
not as
I don't
listenable.
disagree.
So
But
I would much rather listen to this. But
no,
yeah,
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I would be inclined to agree, but I'm just saying, like, if we're talking about artistic merit, I definitely have to give that one more credit because he was doing so.
I see what you mean.
You know, maybe I wouldn't have been as mad if it was in the last episode. And I know a lot of people really love Bowie. I love him too. I'm not as huge on him, and certainly not as huge on this album. I think this is the worst album on the list. But even with that being said, it's okay.
The
I don't.
worst album on the whole list?
Yeah,
Wow, man.
unquestionably.
Well,
Well,
I
you
see
know,
why you're angry now then.
I do like it more than well, actually, hold on. I might like it more than Tattoo You, but I just 28. I can't get behind it, but I respect that you guys enjoy it. I just don't this high on the list. I can't get behind it.
That's fine.
But anyway, that's going to take us now to number 27. An Innocent Man by Billy Joel from 1983. Yes, so glad this one made the list. I mean, I don't know why it's just above Let's Dance, but let's put that aside for a minute and talk about how phenomenal this record is. This was in my top 10, and this is honestly my second favorite Billy Joel album after The Stranger. I think that this is kind of maybe what you were talking about Bowie in the last one. I feel like this was really a huge artistic moment for Billy Joel. And of course, like he was very, very inspired by, dating Christine Brinkley at the time. I mean, who wouldn't be? And he wrote well, I don't think he wrote Uptown Girl for her. I think he was in the process of writing it, and then it was kind of like taken. It was about her. But
Mhm.
man, just how he was like, let me go back to the music that inspired me. Let me go back to these styles, whether he's making homages to James Brown on Easy Money, which man, he not my favorite track on the album, but he yells like James Brown, man. It was like crazy hearing that. Or his homage to the Drifters or the Temptations, or of course the Four Seasons, which we'll get into. So many cool styles he emulates here so perfectly, I think, from top to bottom. The title track is one of his best ballads, I think, in just a wonderful plea of trying to be accepted by a lover who's kind of shut herself off emotionally, and saying, I don't, I shouldn't be taking the burden for this. I'm an innocent man.
Yeah.
It's just and just his ha, ha,
Yeah. Oh, his vocals are so good on that, man.
incredible. And I feel
Yeah.
like Billy Joel, everyone loves him, but I feel like sometimes he doesn't get talked about as much as a vocalist. I think he's incredible. He still sounds great to this
Yeah.
day. And of course, you have so many great songs in here. Tell Her About It, which is his homage to the Supremes and the Temptation, is so and just
Mhm.
just such a relatable story about just trying to like holding yourself off from sharing your feelings for someone. And he's saying, tell her about it, tell her everything you feel, give her every reason that to make sure that you're for real. And reminds me of some certain situations that I've seen that turned out for the best, thankfully.
Mhm.
This Night, yet again, another beautiful ballad. I love Christy Lee, which is his just hilarious double entendre filled homage to Little Richard, an absolute hoot. His homage to Smokey Robinson, Leave a Tender Moment Alone, is such a beautiful ballad. But obviously, the two behemoth tracks on this thing, of course, The Longest Time, which might be my favorite song.
That's my favorite.
The longest for the
Yeah.
longest time. That I think that was written about Christine Brinkley.
Mhm.
And one of his most catchy, one of his most timeless songs, sounds like it could have been ripped straight out of Fifth. And talk about how this album holds up. I think the fact that he's homaging to all these older styles automatically makes it a timeless album compared to a lot of the albums from this day. And that's probably another reason why I have it so high on this list. And of course, Uptown Girl, which is basically a Four Seasons song, but so catchy,
Mm-hmm.
so immediate. The Uptown Girl, she was living in her uptown world. You know, just
Mm-hmm.
so catchy, and so many great hooks on the song. Even on
Yeah.
the bridge. And when she's walking, she's looking so fine. I mean, how can you not love those two songs? They're absolute staples, and his not even just his live repertoire, but just his catalog in general. And I think that this album, from top to bottom, not a weak song on here, though there's some that I might not enjoy as much. This is an amazing record. I think should be a lot higher on the list, but I am very glad to see it at least in the top 30.
Yeah, man, you said it all. I would just add that "Keeping the Faith" is another great track
Oh,
to close
yeah,
out the
yeah.
album. But
I like that one.
and I mean, overall, yeah, I had this on my list. I can see it being higher as well. I just am a little astonished that it's the only Billy Joel album to make the list, because he had some other really strong records in the
Glass
80's.
Houses.
Glass
Yeah.
Houses, Nylon Curtain, I think, is great. So yeah, but this definitely is the best. So glad to see it made it, and glad to see it made it this high. Great
Yeah.
pick, guys.
In an absolute landmark in his discography. I mean, it's hard to think of many Billy Joel records that are more immediate, more timeless than this one, except The Stranger. So
Yeah.
yeah, guys, that's going to take us right to number 26.
Double Fantasy by John Lennon and Yoko Ono from 1980. This was a comeback album for John, and man, it's got so many great songs from him, just like starting off, a great intro to the album. Of course, you've got songs like "I'm Losing You," a wonderful ballad, "Beautiful Boy, Darling Boy," written for Sean. You've got "Watching the Wheels," which might be my favorite track on the album. Really great message on there. "Woman," an amazing ballad. I mean, every John song on here is an absolute classic. And, the Yoko stuff, not as much. But, it is a double fantasy. So she had to have her time on here as well. But for that reason, this might be a little high on the list, but
Yeah.
it's great to see Mr. Lennon make it. Absolutely love his material on here. So great pick, guys.
Yeah, I think that this should be lower. I certainly don't think it should be above Innocent Man or Faith or Full Moon Fever, and a bunch of other albums. But look, I mean, this, as you said, it was such a comeback album for Lennon, and unfortunately, a short-lived comeback, because obviously 2 weeks after this album came out, he was shot outside of his Dakota apartment by Mark David Chapman, one of the worst tragedies in the history of music, but just in the history of the world, man. I mean,
Yeah.
Lennon was someone who gave so many people so much, and one of the most influential figures in music. But this really is such a bittersweet parting record, because it really was about his domestic bliss. He took those 5 years off, and he took it, devoting his life to Yoko, devoting his life to Sean, and just like starting over, really says it all. What a beautiful way to start this album. And of course, I absolutely love, well, Watching the Wheels is great. Woman is one of his most beautiful ballads, especially on the chorus. I love you, well, it's just such a beautiful tribute. I've always felt like the songs he wrote for Yoko were like some of his best. Surprisingly enough, man, he pours his heart out into it. And of course, to me, I think the absolute masterpiece on here is "Beautiful Boy," with some very Caribbean inspired percussion with those steel drums. But man, what a beautifully tragic song, because you could just tell how much, he obviously wasn't a great father to Julian, but you could tell how much he loves this boy. But to me, the most heartbreaking line on the whole album is when he says, "I can't wait to see you come of age," and just knowing what happened to him, man. It's like, geez, it really just hits on a much more ironic and in tragic level, because you really felt his love for his son, and that beautiful, 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 beautiful boy. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just one of his absolute best songs, and I really feel like this would be his best solo album if it weren't for Yoko, because let's be honest,
Yeah.
I actually do love one Yoko song, and I think it's Yes, I'm Your Angel. That one's really catchy. And it has that, you can like the kind of Japanese influenced melody on it that I love. But man, a lot of this Yoko stuff is not the best.
Kiss,
And
kiss, kiss. Yeah. Not
don't
great.
like that one. But I will say though, I mean, the fact that this album is this good is because these are some of John's most heartfelt, some of his best songs in his catalog, and
Yeah.
I think it definitely deserves a spot on the list, though I wouldn't put it as high. And what a great way to end your career on that, though. Unfortunately, we could have gotten so much more,
Yeah.
if it weren't for the circumstances.
Absolutely. Great pick.
And yeah, that is going to take us to number 25. She's So Unusual by Cyndi Lauper from 1983, her debut studio album. Yeah, this is a good choice. Not sure why it's number 25, but I mean, I did have it on my list, and yeah, it is. I mean, just for the few tracks on here that really stand. Obviously, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. How can you not love that? One of the brightest pop songs from the 80's. Just absolutely incredible, that hook, and so timeless. Time After Time, if we're talking about time, I don't know, that didn't come off as well as I'd hoped it would. Such a beautiful duet here with Rob Hyman, and everyone knows, if you're lost you will find it time after time. So I don't know the lyrics as well. I should.
That's classic. Yeah.
And of course, All Through the Night is such, like, especially her vocals on this song.
Oh yeah.
Incredible.
Crazy what she does on that. Yeah.
So powerful. And I just love the synth. Like, you hear that intro, you know what it is.
And it's so haunting too on the verses, like really, really beautiful melodies.
Dude, just the bridges, everything about it is incredible. Though I think this album is a little inconsistent, especially the cover of When You Were Mine by Prince, which I find it's good. I just don't understand, like, approaching that song from a woman's perspective, just because how psychosexual Prince was. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and it doesn't hold a candle to the original Prince version at all. But also, like, the weird Betty Boop shit that she does at the end of this album, I could do without. I think it's kind of stupid, and I think doesn't really come off that well on He's So Unusual and Yeah. Not a huge fan of those songs, but I mean, especially those three tracks alone bring this album to a whole other level. Some of the best songs from the 80's, and I think a great a pop record. Though I do think it should be lower on the list. I am glad to see it. It's certainly not better than a lot of these ones we talked about, though.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't think I actually had it on my final list. It was close to making it, but I get the love for it. I mean, especially the songs that you mentioned. Time After Time, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, absolute staples of the 80's. And Money Changes Everything is actually kind of a cool opener too.
Sure, yeah, that's a good one.
But yeah, I don't think it should be this high, but it's great to see her on the list. Cyndi Lauper, one of the greatest vocalists of the 80's, and she's still out there doing her thing to some extent, but I don't think she ever quite topped this one. So
no.
But yeah, good pick, guys.
Absolutely. This is a great choice, and that will take us to number 24.
Yeah, boy!
Bass, how low can you go? Death row.
It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back by Public Enemy.
Yeah, boy!
Yeah, boy! Yeah, this is it is the highest ranked hip hop album on the list, and while it isn't my favorite, It certainly deserves to be as such because look, I mean, this is considered one of the most influential, not just hip hop albums of all time, but albums of all time, but certainly more so on hip hop. These guys, man, like I know I was talking about, some of my hang ups with 80s rap music, but these guys were where it's at. And I don't quite love this album, believe it or not. I think it's great. Um, I had it lower, but I certainly agree with its placement on the list. Unlike 15 of all time on Rolling Stone's list, surprised it actually was this low. But hey, I'm not going to complain about it. But look, I mean, what Public Enemy did on this album was so groundbreaking on so many levels. First off, the sampling is crazy. We were talking about Paul's Boutique, which I think the production might be a little bit better on this album, but this is a better album as far as I'm concerned. And just how many samples they can fit into one song and create this controlled chaos, if you will, is just incredible. Especially on songs like Bring the Noise, which I mean is just an absolute hip hop classic. I think maybe their best song. And just the stuff Chuck D is talking about. I think the themes on here are what really put this album above a lot of their other contemporaries. I mean, who cared about what the Beastie Boys were talking about? These guys are talking about like Afrocentrism and like so many different things. And of course, like he even says he's like talking about who is it? I'm forgetting. Oh, Lord Farrakhan. He brings up Lord Farrakhan. He's got some words. Maybe you should listen to him, and how he's calling out the radios where it's like black radio stations for not playing their music because it's like maybe we're too black for you because we're talking about all this like deeply profound messages that are supposed to enlighten and bring up our community. But yet you guys still feel we're too controversial, and obviously this album was very controversial when it came out because of how they tackled issues of race and of course so many systemic issues. But man, they do it so well. And then of course you had just great songs like Don't Believe the Hype, Don't Believe the Hype, and then you hear Terminator X there, like scratching the record. I mean, it's so great. And of course, I mean, the storytelling on some of these songs, especially like Black Steel and the Hour of Chaos, where Chuck D basically is just rapping this whole story about a prison break. And it's incredible not only how he articulates all the injustices going on and a lot of the reasons that some of these people happen to be in this prison, but just the way he explains them getting out and the chaos that ensues is an absolute landmark in storytelling. And I will say though, I think this album, the reason I don't quite love it, because this is a classic album, there's no question about it. I think that there's just some unnecessary instrumentals that kind of drag this runtime out, and it kind of detracts from the messages that they're sending forth. And just some of the songs like where Flava Flav is like talking about how great he is, and he's not. He beats women, so we were going to throw that one out the window. But yeah, I mean stuff like that kind of bring the album down, and some of the messages might be a little bit dated, but for what this is an incredibly seminal hip-hop album, and just an album in general. It really pushed the medium forward in so many ways that we can't even comprehend, because it is a blueprint for so many hip-hop albums to follow. And I think it a great spot on this list. It absolutely deserves it, just on influence alone.
Yeah, that's really what I was going to say. Incredibly influential, and for that alone, I think it deserves to be this high. I think it's at a pretty good spot. I don't think it would be, Rolling Stone having it in the top 15 or whatever, like you said. I don't quite agree with that, especially of all time. So, but yeah, I do think it's a little long runtime wise, and I agree with basically everything you said. I do. I think Chuck D, it's just his voice is so iconic
it's huge. Iconic,
and Bring the Noise, Don't Believe the Hype, I think are the standouts. But some of the stuff towards the end, like Night of the Living Bassheads, is interesting too. But but yeah, I mean, the beats are just incredible for the time.
Terminator X, man.
Yeah, so good. So the Bomb Squad, man, and the whole thing, and they're still in a sense doing their thing. I think they came out with an album just a few years ago, and they still Chuck D is with Prophets of Rage and stuff. So still doing their thing, but I don't think they ever quite hit as strong, even though I like Fear of a Black Planet a little bit more as an album. I think this is a great choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, Chuck D is just one of the most iconic voices and MCs in rap music. So
Yeah.
gotta have this one on the list, and I'm glad to see it where it is. So that's going to take us to number 23.
Well, they blew up the chicken man in Philly last night. Now they
Nebraska by Bruce Springsteen from 1982. This is actually my favorite Bruce Springsteen album, and I'm not the biggest fan of his overall. I would say probably kind of like Bowie is for you, maybe. Like where I really respect him as an artist, but I don't love all of his stuff, which I know we've discussed in the 70s. I wasn't, huge on Born to Run, for example, but this Bruce just stripped down just him and a 4-track recorder for this entire album, which is essentially just acoustic. The storytelling I think is so good on these songs. Atlantic City, of course, is a standout, so well known, but especially towards the middle of the album, it gets really dark with songs like Highway Patrolman and this Murderer on the Run, which I think he was inspired by the Terrence Malick film Badlands.
Title track, yeah.
Yeah, and some of these other songs, man, it's really tight at 40 minutes, which I think if it had gone longer, you could have started to lose some people. But I just think that it's so compelling in the storytelling, the songwriting, and the vocal performance, which usually I'm not huge on with Bruce. But I think on this album, it's just so well done. I haven't listened to it in a while, but I need to again because I absolutely love it. So great pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be completely honest with you. The first time I heard this album, I must not have been listening because I thought I was like, it's good, but whatever, it's too stripped down. And I listened to this again, I'm like, no, this is his best album from the 80s. I think, and I think, another career highlight of many from Bruce Springsteen. But as you said, this is like his version of Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, I think, where he really strips everything down to the basics. It's just him and the guitar. And it really is maybe his darkest album with the stuff that he's getting into on here. I mean, it is really intense, especially on songs like Atlantic City, and in the title track, we was talking about like the electric chair, and of course, we were talking about Badlands, which he was obviously very inspired by for many other songs, including one of the same name.
Right.
But yeah, man, I mean, this album has some of his most raw cuts. I think Highway Patrolman is an absolute masterpiece, and Springsteen, and it's my favorite song on the album actually. And just how he's like, the way he looks at this kind of like familial relationship, just like a man who turns his back on his family, he just ain't no good. And the conflicting nature of this man who's a force of the law, a force of someone trying to enforce the peace for, however you take that. And his brother who's on the complete opposite side, and just this bond, this love that they have for each other kind of like coming to head in this beautifully tension-filled song. I just think it's an absolutely storytelling masterpiece.
Yeah, and just how he says, "Please don't catch me," over and over again. Like it's brilliant.
And I just love that chorus. Everybody laughing and drinking. Ain't nothing but blood on blood. It's amazing, the lyrics on the song, and I just think highlights that Bruce Springsteen is one of the greatest lyricists of all time. I think no argument there. Songs like Used Cars is absolutely brilliant. My Father's House, has this really kind of profound kind of I guess mental reckoning with this guy's relationship with his father and how that's affected him to this day, the bitterness that he has. I mean, the storytelling on here from top to bottom is just incredible. Though I feel like like when he's like doing that screaming thing, I think it's on State Trooper or whatever. It's kind of it's a little obnoxious for me. But man, I mean, this really is just such a tight and cohesive work, thematically speaking, and features his, as I said, his darkest set of songs. I think it should be in the top 20 at least. but it's I mean, it wouldn't be right to not have this on this list. This is an absolute classic from Bruce Springsteen, and I'm glad to see it at least this high on the list.
Yeah, and I failed to mention too. I mean, just thinking about his career, like it was a ballsy move to do this, coming off of an
Yeah.
album like The River that was a lot more like jangly and hooky, and just strip it all back. And I think initially his intent was to do the full band thing, but then he realized he had some real magic here with just the demos. And yeah, I think more artists should probably take a cue from that sometimes. Sometimes less is more. And I think it really worked out on this.
Oh, 100% agree. And just to think to see where he went after this album to absolute superstardom once again, but I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point soon. So yeah,
Yeah.
guys, absolutely phenomenal pick. And that is going to take us to number 22. At number 22, of course, we have Bad, the first appearance of Michael Jackson on the 80s list. One of his only 2 albums from the 80s, believe it or not. It seems like he was so prolific in that decade. Crazy to think he only came out with 2 albums.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what this is doing at number, 22? Come on, this should be at least in the top 15. This is one of the most iconic pop records from the 80s, man. I mean, wow. I mean, just from the opening title track is just, I mean, look at how many hits were on this thing. Like, to
Mm-hmm.
follow up Thriller was such a difficult task. And obviously, this isn't as good as Thriller, but man, I mean, the songs that are amazing on here, or the best songs on here, are absolutely incredible. Some of the most iconic pop songs of all time, like the title track, and of course, "The Way You Make Me Feel," man. Oh my goodness, one of my absolute favorite Michael Jackson. Hey,
That one's
pretty
great.
baby, with the high heels on.
Yeah.
It's just so hooky, so immediate. Like most of MJ's songs,
And so driving that bass line,
oh
like
yeah,
that yeah. Oh, it's so good.
dude, so good.
Yeah.
The way you make me feel, the way you make me feel. I
Yeah.
mean, just how can you not love it?
Yeah.
I even love underrated tracks like Liberian Girl, which was not a huge hit, but it could have been, considering how many hits are on this album. Number one, top 5, top 10 otherwise. I mean, just incredible. Of
Yeah.
course, you have not my favorite song, but as he continued with the string of duets off of Thriller, you have one here, Just Good Friends, with Stevie Wonder himself. But I think the best duet on this album is I Just Can't Stop Loving You.
Oh yeah.
Sadia Garrett, who wrote a couple songs on here, and I mean, just such a beautiful. Each time the wind blows, I hear your voice slow. It calls my name. It just
Mhm.
such. I mean, very understated. But when you hit that chorus, it's just so incredible. I
Yeah.
just can't stop loving you. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But man, I mean, so many great. Believe it or not, I don't love Dirty Diana though.
I
Is
don't love that either, but for
okay.
a Michael Jackson rocker, it's pretty good though.
Well, but it
you
it
know,
does not rock harder than Smooth Criminal though.
nah, yeah, that's one of the best.
Dude, one of the best riffs of all time. That dun
Yeah,
dun dun
that
dun dun
bass
dun
riff. Yeah.
dun 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 dun, and then Eddie, are you okay? Will you tell us are you okay, Eddie? I mean, it's just
No.
so catchy. But man, I really think the best song, I think one of the greatest songs of all time, one of the greatest songs from the 80s for sure, is
Yeah.
Man in the Mirror. As soon as you hear that the synth intro, you know exactly what it is. And
Oh yeah.
just such an uplifting message, man. And yet again, I think the closest Michael Jackson, obviously he was experimenting with so many different styles on here. Some work to great degrees, others but this song, I mean, just his kind of take on a gospel song with that choir coming, that booming choir.
Mhm.
The I'm talking with the man in the mirror. Oh yeah, I mean, just amazing. And what a beautiful song about taking a look at yourself and kind of saying like, what do I need to do to be a better person? You take it a day at a time. But we can all be better people, make this world a better place. Which may call into question some things in his legacy, but we won't get into that right now. but
Yeah, he
really one of
probably
his
should
best
have looked in the mirror more often. But yeah,
hey,
man, what a song, man. Like, yeah,
oh,
just for that song alone, man, like this album deserves to be pretty high on the list. But yeah, I think it's everything you said, man. You mentioned all the ones that I wanted to say.
good ones.
Um, yeah, for sure. I think it is a little uneven, but I feel the same way about Thriller. Like, it's not perfect all the way through. Some people may disagree. Well, I'm sure we'll get to that,
Mhm.
but yeah, the highs are extremely high, man.
Yeah.
Man in the Mirror, just incredible. One of the best tracks of the 80's, like you said.
But
So
then you have tracks like Speed Demon, which is quite
yeah,
frankly embarrassing.
yeah.
I mean, the production still can be commended though. I love the production on it.
Mhm.
But the, the fact that Michael Jackson wrote a song about him getting a speeding ticket is just as stupid as it sounds.
Yeah,
So could do without that track, but I think the highs are just like we said, they are so soaring highs, like
right.
Mount Everest highs. You can't beat that. This is one of the most iconic pop albums of all time, and that's only at number 22. So that will take us right to number 21.
Moving Pictures by Rush from 1981. The Rockers have made the list, and a little surprising that it's this high, but then again, not quite, knowing some of the people that watch our channels. But yeah, this is definitely, I think, Rush's best album. I mean, just from the iconic opening track, Tom Sawyer alone, which for some reason I thought the runtime of that was longer. I'm looking at it right now and it's 4.5 minutes. But
Feels it,
it's
but in a good way.
yeah, like I don't mean that in a bad way. It's definitely, it just feels more epic than that, I guess. And Limelight, of course, another huge song. Really, there's not a weak track on here. I do think, side B is not as strong as side A, and I'm not a huge Rush fan in general, but I definitely see the appeal, and I comedically as well. I don't know if you've seen the movie I Love You Man, but the guys in the movie are like big Rush fans, and even go to one of their concerts, and like form a little band playing their stuff, and it's just hilarious. And I always, whenever I think of Rush, I think of that movie now. So maybe that's kind of a bad thing, but I don't know. I love them in a way that, I don't know. I find them a little goofy, even though
Yeah,
Neil
I agree.
Peart is obviously one of the greatest drummers of all time, and actually all of them,
Incredible.
musically are nuts. But yeah, I don't take them as seriously, I guess, as some. So
Yeah, and I think part of that has to do a lot of times, not necessarily on this album, because this album was more straightforward, but I think Neil Peart's lyrics are pretty pretentious and just kind of,
yeah,
dumb at sometimes, which is not to take away from him as a musician. I mean, this is my favorite Rush album, for whatever it's worth. And it didn't make my list, but
hmm
I don't think it should be above Bad or Public Enemy or Nebraska or any of the ones we mentioned except Bowie. But regardless, I mean, this is, as you said, not really a weak song on here, though. I think it falls off in the second half. Tom Sawyer is one of their best songs, and just so impressive. Neil Peart, man. I mean, he could just change time signatures at the drop of a hat,
yeah,
especially in this song. It's absolutely incredible what he's doing. He's like top three drummers for me of all time. I even put him above John Bonham, because I
wow.
think technically, yeah, man. I mean, technically, this guy was on another level.
Oh
It's
yeah, and
unbelievable.
Geddy Lee, like the way he switched off between bass and
Bass and
synthesizers, like, and sang at the same time. Like, really, I'm not a huge fan of the vocals,
yeah.
but I think, just super talented.
Oh, absolutely. And Alex Lifeson too. I mean, one of the
Mhm.
most underrated guitarists of all time. I put him
Yeah.
up there with Prince, man. Really, just so great. But of course, X or YYZ is an
hmm
incredible instrumental. One of my favorite tracks on this album. And of course, Limelight is fantastic. And really Neil Peart's kind of look at fame, and how he's kind of saying, I'm sorry if I seem standoffish. It's just I don't necessarily, I'm here for the music. I'm not here to get all this, attention thrown at me. And I think it's a very personal song in that sense, but a really great one in their catalog. I even like the whole suite of Camera Eye is really, really cool. Not my favorite song. Don't really care as much what they're talking about lyrically. And of course, songs like Red Bruschetta, where Geddy Lee's talking about his uncle in his car. His like I guess he had like this car from the past and they banned motor cars. It's a weird story, but it is a lot of fun. Even though I don't really care about the lyrics as much. But yeah, I mean, it's a really good album. I just don't know why it's so high on the list.
Yeah.
Should have been a couple episodes lower if you ask me.
Probably, yeah.
I don't think it's as iconic as Bad. I mean, how many hit singles were off this album? Like 2?
Right. And now whenever I hear Limelight, I can't help but think of Paul Rudd on Jason Segel's shoulders doing this and going, slapping the bass. That's why I can't take it that seriously.
that was amazing, by the way. I'm so glad you did
slapping the bass, man.
That's gotta be a meme now.
Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah.
But little too high on the list, but it is a good choice, and I'm glad to see it make the list. I think it deserves to be on here. I just don't think it is in the same place of iconography as some of these other records. But you had to have these Canadian rockers on here. And rest in peace, Neil Peart. So sad to hear about him. One of the most talented musicians ever at his very specific craft. So good to see it on the list.
Yeah, man. So another great episode, and hey, we're getting into it, man. The top 20, crazy. I can't believe we're there already. And also, we mentioned this on the last episode, but you can already start voting for the top 90 albums of the 90s. So get those in, guys.
Already got some lists and submissions already. And of course, guys, let's not forget, if you haven't already, you got to subscribe to Johnny Radio. He's coming up with some really interesting stuff as of late, kind of, maybe diversifying a little bit. And I know he's got some great material down the pipeline, as do I. So if you haven't subscribed to me yet, you got to do that too. Have some exciting stuff planned for the future. Maybe a video essay coming at some point down the line. So we'll see about that. But yeah, guys, thanks for tuning in. I do hope you're enjoying this series, whether we agree on these albums or not. It's just such a great time seeing what you guys pick and just talking about some really iconic records in general. So yeah, until next week, guys, we'll see you then, and take it easy.
Peace.